the first point of extensibility that we'll be taking a look at here is the application. So in any ASP.NET application, there's always a global application class, and by default, the application class is going to be an instance of HttpApplication, as we mentioned. So that's the base class for applications, the HttpApplication. You can customize it though. You can actually create a derivative of application, and the reason you might want to do that is it exposes a number of events that you can add handlers for that will be invoked during the lifetime of requests that come into the application that you're building. So unlike a handler, an endpoint, which would be associated with a particular request, the application gives you access to various points in the request processing lifecycle of every single request that comes into your application. So you'll tend to do things at this in the application that are global in your application. So things like doing security checks at the beginning, or initializing some data that's shared across all of your application, all of your pages. It also serves as the initial entry point for a request. So if you want to somehow reject a request, for example, if you want to do some pre-processing before the handler actually gets invoked, you can do that in the application class. You can actually preempt the request and stop it from going back. It also is a collection of global resources here. The cache and the session state are all accessible through the application class as well. And it's accessible through the context and page classes as we saw before. So if you put some functionality into your application class, you can always access it from other locations in your site. Okay, so that's the role of the application. Here's what the base class, or what part of the base class looks like, just to give you a sense for what you're going to be deriving from. So the application class, HttpApplication, implements the HttpAsync handler, as I mentioned before, and that has the begin process request method that's going to initiate the request processing and go locate the page handler factory typically. But here's what's more interesting to you is the properties that you can use to access pieces of data about the request in the application. So the application object, that's the state in this case, so it's not self-referential. The context, you can always go find that guy. The various modules that are installed with this application. The request and the response, the server, the session, and the user. We saw a lot of these via the context earlier, and in fact many of these just map onto the properties that are defined by the context, but they're here for convenience. A couple of methods that are interesting to know about. The init method is a virtual method you can override, and it's called at the beginning of the application's lifecycle. And complete request, this is one that I was sort of referring to before. This lets you, if you invoke it, it actually stops the request from completing processing. And what you typically would do is set the error code for the response and then call complete request if you wanted to stop the processing of that request. So those are the various things you can access in the application class. And the way you're going to customize, the way you're going to build these is you're just going to create a file called global asax, and that file needs to be placed at the top level of the virtual directory. And then when the application is accessed, it will be parsed and compiled into an assembly, much like pages are, and a new instance of the application class or your derivative will be constructed. So you're going to create a class that derives from application and have it use that class instead of the default HttpApplication class. And we'll do an example of that next.